So today we're talking about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So the synopsis for this is Miles Morales catapults across the multiverse where he encounters a team of spider people charged with protecting its very existence. When the heroes clash on how to handle a new threat, Miles must redefine what it means to be a hero. So this is a 2023 film, follow-up to the 2018 Into the Spider-Verse. It's directed by Joaquin Dos Santos, Kent Powers, and Justin K. Thompson. This is starring Shameik Moore, Haley Steinfeld, Brian Tyree Henry, Luna Lauren Velez, Jake Johnson, Jason Schwartzman, Issa Rae, Karen Sony, Daniel Kaluuya, and Oscar Isaac. So, man, I can't wait to talk about this movie. But first and foremost, if you don't want the spoilers and you want to skip to the rating, you can do that now. If you are ready for some spoilers, let's jump into it. Or swing into it. That's probably a better swing into it. Yeah, Spider-Man. Alright, at the ending of Into the Spider-Verse, which is the first one, we kind of get this end credit scene of Gwen, who is the new improved Spider-Woman, I guess, coming to see Miles. In this movie, though, we really kind of start from her point of view, from Gwen's point of view, in terms of what's her story like in her own universe and where she comes from. It's pretty clever how they play kind of the different universes and where these different people come from, and it kind of gives you insight into those individual characters. While we see some of the characters that came back from the first movie, not all of them, but you get to see a lot of other Spider-Man and new ones as well. So we kind of go from Gwen's point of view as we kind of kickstart the movie, but then we kind of shift back to how her point of view connects to Miles. And we get to see her come back to Miles' universe and meet his parents, and we kind of see what Miles is going through now that he has become, the legit Spider-Man of his neighborhood, Brooklyn's finest, etc., etc. And we start seeing how he's operating in his city as a teenager that goes to high school, but also is now Spider-Man. And then once him and Gwen kind of reconnect over the villain of the week that actually turns out to be a way bigger threat, it's called a Spot, we start to see this kind of spiral into this whole new adventure that takes him across the Spider-Verse essentially, and meet all these different new spider people. The cool thing that I really loved about this movie is the animation. Not only did they use some of the similar animation they used from the last film, which is kind of that comic book style. I know sometimes that gives people headaches. Absolutely love that comic booky style because it takes me back to when I started first reading comic books. And then one thing that I really also loved about the movie is how, good Lord, they included every single type of Spider-Man person that you could find, which I just thought was cool. I will say that a lot of people have said that this is, these movies, Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse, are some of the best Spider-Man movies that have ever been made. I think I kind of agree. For the longest time, I was a big proponent that nothing can beat Spider-Man 2, hands down. It's one of the best Spider-Man movies. Even with the Tom Holland films, you cool. We're good with you, Tom Holland. You did a good job holding it down. But Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 2 is GOAT level, cannot be beat. I think I'm starting to change the way I feel about it. And I will say that for the time that it came out, Spider-Man 2 was it for comic book movies. It was fantastic. It had everything you wanted. Compelling villains, compelling superhero losing his powers, etc., etc. But this movie just seems to take everything that they've learned about making Spider-Man movies over the last, what was the first Spider-Man, like 2001? So over the last 22 years, and then kind of putting it together in this new wrap with a Spider-Man that we're not very familiar with, because we've seen Peter Parker done in 3 different iterations with Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire, Tom Holland. But to see Miles Morales, who is a known character, you know, a pretty well-known Spider-Man in his own regard, but to see him come to the screen in this way is pretty awesome. I know a lot of fans have complained that we haven't seen him in live action, but I don't want people to get discouraged by that, because doing the film in animation has allowed them to do so much more than they possibly could do in live action, which I think will make the live action version of a Miles Morales, you know, that much more impactful, because you kind of already know what he can do. So I take this similar to the fact of like the 90s Spider-Man series. Like, we got all those animated iterations of Spider-Man before we ever got a live action, so we are deeply connected to that character. You know, obviously if you read comic books, you're way more in, but I know I got into comic books a lot later in life, and I was a cartoon kid growing up in the 80s. So being able to see all of that come to the big screen was like crazy. Starting with Blade, X-Men, Spider-Man, and you know, now we are knee deep in all the Marvel stuff. But this movie and just how they put it together, how the characters interact with each other, the stories that they're telling, running multiple stories from different point of views, is kind of like every Spider person has their own story to tell, and from their perspective they're all doing the right thing for what needs to happen. And this movie just kind of goes in such a different direction, especially with Spider-Man 2099. That is really he's pretty much the antagonist in this film, but I wouldn't say like he's a villain necessarily, because he thinks what he is doing is the right thing. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing in terms of what he's doing. I think he's living from his own perspective and his own point of view, which you have to respect, right? It's the whole Killmonger conversation in Black Panther. He's living from his point of view, and from his point of view, these things need to transpire, like, you know, making sure that these canon events happening and stopping Miles at all costs. Like, these things have to happen in order for things not to go haywire. One of the cool things that happened in this movie was no end credit scene, but they left the movie on such a cliffhanger. Fall off the cliff. I went with my daughter and we were watching, and I kept thinking to myself, like, man, this movie, man, you know, it's going to be a little bit longer. And as I thought we were getting ready to move into the third act, turns out it was a cliffhanger and the credits started rolling, and I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I was amped up and I was ready, and I thought we were getting ready to go for like another 40 minutes to the next thing, but they hit that cliffhanger with the other universe Miles, and it was just fantastic. So I didn't give away that much, obviously. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. The next one's supposed to be coming out in March 2024. So a year's not that bad. Obviously, you know, animation takes a little bit longer to wait. If we think about it, last one came out in 2018, so we've been waiting 5 years. I think we can make one more year to kind of finish the story and wrap it up. Obviously, it has humor. It's such a great film. Jake Johnson, who is our resident Peter B. Parker, he just cracks me up all day long. Not only just because of his voice and his character, but just how he is kind of Miles' mentor, but he's not your traditional Spider-Man. He's kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to call him hokey, but that's kind of the way I would explain it. It was like the hokey Spider-Man. But he's still a very cool Spider-Man, and he's got a kid, which I can relate to. So it's a great movie. I highly recommend to go see it. If I were going to rate this movie, I'd probably say 5 chips for sure. And once again, I don't want to get in this habit of giving 5 chips to every movie, but I really, really love this movie. And I hope that the next iteration of this film surpasses it. I can't really think of anything in this film that I found problematic necessarily, and this could very well be me skewing my point of view because I just love Spider-Man films. But I really couldn't think of anything that really took me away from enjoying the film. The soundtrack alone, good lord. Metro Boomin stepped in to do the tracks on the soundtrack, and oh man, Daniel Pemberton did the music for the film. But the soundtrack alone, if you have not listened to the soundtrack, please go out and listen to the soundtrack. It is really dope. The music in the film makes it for me. It doesn't take much for me to be sold on music. Music is such a big part of life, especially for me being a musician. But man, I love the music in this film. So, 5 chips. I highly recommend that you go see it. If there's anything that you want to talk about after you watch it, come back. One thing that I kept thinking about, and hit me up in the comments, of course, after you subscribe and like the video. One thing that I talked to one of my friends about earlier about the film was about how if the spider that bit Miles came from another universe, then